Hi everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Sarah. I will be when I first wrote this presentation, what I had in mind was to see ways that I think Asia's DevRel can learn from the US DevRel, because I think that that's a very much more mature market, and I think that there's so much potential in Asia. I've seen like so many developers across the APAC region, as well as India and China. My friends over there have been connecting with me virtually, so I really hope that over time we can learn to grow more into what the US has today, and to be able to elevate our developers and engineers on that platform. Okay, so I'll share a little bit about myself. So I am, yeah, that's me over there. I've had a little bit of a time in the tech industry. Previously, I was at Microsoft, so that was my first job out of school. I was at Microsoft for about 5 years, and in my last 2 years at Microsoft, I was doing developer relations. And that's how I got into this community and to meet everyone, to meet Asushi-san, and then get to know about DevRel Asia, and also actually over time co-found a few initiatives of my own, which has led to me cultivating a passion to what I'm talking about today, because I just see so many great people in the region, and I really think we can do more to showcase them and to bring them to more opportunities globally. So I co-founded DevRel Folks Asia with my co-founder, Elisha. I don't know, some of you might have attended her talk earlier on. She's awesome. She's also a co-founded Tech Ladies. DevRel Folks Asia as a whole is actually something that we came up with during the COVID time, and we thought that there was a lot that we could learn across the region in terms of how we were responding to the pandemic with technology solutions and community solutions that can connect people to come out with better solutions to help people out. And so that's where it really came from. I also co-founded DevSpeak, which is a community. Actually, we're having an event next week. So if you're interested, please join us. DevSpeak is a community that also brings together different developers across Asia. So from all different parts of Asia, we have quite a regional and also sometimes international audience joining us, and that's where we talk a little bit more about the technical side of things, and like having developers share their best practices, and also having DevRel folks share on that community as well. And then also the Good Devs, which was also an initiative to come up with solutions, but more in the Singapore context. So I myself am from Singapore, and right now I'm actually working at GovTech, which is a Singapore government team. And so I overlook the Singapore to US relations, which also puts me in a good place to kind of understand the differences in the two different markets. So that's a little bit about myself. Yes, and I will now share. Okay, I'll start my presentation. So I was thinking to start with a little bit of context. So yes, the title below says I'm not a history teacher, and I really am not. I am relatively new to DevRel, and I have a lot of respect for people who've been in the community for a long time. I didn't really live through much of this, but being around the communities and speaking to different people, this is kind of my view of how DevRel came about. Actually today, even if you do like a Google search to what is the history of developer relations, it is very young, even in the US side. I think most of it started around like 2008 and 2010. And the reason why I'm sharing this is that all these firms that you see over here, which are big names that you see in DevRel, and you see these speakers in a lot of different conferences, these are all companies from America, and they are based mostly headquartered in the US in different parts. And so that's really where the DevRel culture came from. So of course, US DevRel's market is going to be way more mature than what we have over here in Asia. So, just running through, I think context is always very important, and learning about the history of how that has started can also let us reflect on how we can, since we are in early days, how we can follow that process and also build up a booming developer culture over here in Asia. So if you look at the top row, that's where I think actually these companies, it's not that we didn't have engineers, we had engineers. I mean, it goes all the way back, right, to the first computer, and we had many developers and engineers. However, these few like Stack Overflow, Twilio, GitHub, DigitalOcean, these are like companies that started having that thought around pivoting very heavily on developers and putting them at the forefront of the business. And when I say business and I'm starting off with business, I know that in DevRel and with developers, we try not to look too much at the terms like profit, and we focus more on like, I don't want to do sales and marketing, I'm more like developer engineering only and authenticity. But the reality is also that industry is very closely tied with community and culture, and it is one of the cornerstones of why culture can develop in a certain area. And so when we had these companies starting to bring in conceive the concept of developer relations, we then had the next wave, which is what you see in the companies below that follows. And so these are companies like sites or platforms that have gotten really big, like dev.to and Vonage, which used to be known as Nexmo. These are all award-winning DevRel culture communities, and they help to formalize and cement developer relations as a proper industry on its own. And so when you do a search, you will realize that articles about what DevRel is only date back all the way up to like 2010. And so it's only in the first decade as compared to many other parts of the tech industry. And that's why I think we're in a good place in Asia to then pick up on a lot of this and see how we can also make that journey in the next 5 to 6 years, 5 to 10 years here in Asia. And of course, you have the final role, which are your FANG companies, and that's when the industry tends to hit maturity, right? So we're still very much at the first wave, but then what can success look like? Success can look like when we hit maturity and we have large companies like, your mainstay tech companies in Asia taking on developer relations, let's say like your Samsungs who have been around for a very long time, or any other big tech firms that take on developer relations and start to properly headcount and have a team dedicated to it. And then that's when that's when a lot more investment comes into developer relations as a whole. I myself was at Microsoft when the Cloud Advocate team that was formed about 1.5, 2 years before I joined. And so, that's when we really formalize things. And then I think that's when the industry as a whole starts to take note from those leaders in the industry and say like, okay, developer relations is a real culture that we need to focus on now. And so I'm sharing this history because then we can think about how do we create that kind of same momentum within Asia? Yeah. So that's a little bit of the history of it. And of course, like if you yourself know of any companies, please add on to this chart of where you see these things, because this is so far it's my perspective as I've gone on in DevRel. Okay, so talking a little bit about that. So this talk is about comparing what the US DevRel culture is and how we can learn from it in Asia. And so based on what I just shared with you, taking an industry and community and cultural, like 30,000 feet view of how that is formed, I kind of wanted to share some notes that I took around how a culture can be formed. And so these are like 7 different factors that I think are the key factors as to how you get people joining, how you get people at events, more people coming, more people wanting to find out about DevRel, people actually taking the route from learning how to code and being a coder into actually entering the DevRel industry instead, and being the ones that help to champion and create more platforms for developers and engineers to engage. So I'll run through this list a little bit, and what this list will do is that after running through this, I will then talk a little bit about how in Asia we can apply some of these factors that are used in the US to kind of create that DevRel culture for us to build what we have, to build on what we have in Asia. So the first one would be industry opportunities, which is what I talked about previously. So I know, again, profit and business is like, how is that tied to DevRel? DevRel is very about connecting people and not so much about sales and marketing. But I think, with all of us coming from companies and being part of the DevRel unit there, we do know that industry opportunities and business investment are one of the reasons why their investment allows us to have that space for us to do what we do best and what we're passionate about, and to be able to, not stress ourselves out about, I can actually have swag and I can actually have like food at my events to be able to host different people. And so that's a very real factor that comes in. Industry opportunities are also really important because, coders start as coders, and, coding itself can usually becomes a profession. Usually you code as a passion and it leads to a job, or you are looking to build a job and then you get into coding. So either way, it is very closely tied to industry opportunities. And I think when people join events in DevRel, you join your meetups and stuff, you are also looking for different job opportunities potentially that come by, aside from the different community connections and the very real and authentic connections that you do make when you go for those community sessions. So industry opportunities is a big factor there. The second factor is around technical leadership. So technical leadership and skilling. So these are going to be really important factors because we can't have DevRel without the developers themselves. And I think in Asia, in the US, there are a lot of very well-known and prominent technical leaders. And because tech is so much about innovation, we always need, it's very instinctual for developers in DevRel to always have this culture of learning and growth. And you need those role models to be able to mentor and create like goals that you can work towards on. And so technical leadership in the US is a very key reason why they are booming as a culture. And that means that we also need very strong technical leadership here in Asia. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can achieve that in a bit. Then following that is technical skilling. So things like, not just mentorship by the leaders, but also things like the workshops and the courses, the camps. This is a very vibrant scene in the US. There are so many different camps and courses and free study groups that you can join in the US. And I think that's where we can have a little bit more of this in Asia as well. And I think that will help to create more of such engineers and developers to then join the communities that we have. And then therefore, like DevRel as a culture can grow even larger in Asia. Okay, so moving out of like the industry and the professional and the technical capabilities of it, we move down into community. And so this is once you have all these coders and professionals around, and that's when you can get into the community piece of it. And that's where you can build off the community piece of it based on this like, I think a database or like source of people. Then that's where you build a community piece. So community thought leadership is going to be very important. I think in Asia, community, sometimes because I think I don't know if it's the Asia culture, I think we are very focused on our jobs and the things that we do. Sometimes community is not very much championed here, but in the US, it is seen as a, proper piece to have and proper skill to have, and something that we need to dedicate proper resources to. And so different components of it would include community thought leadership, having community organizers who step up and, do get that kind of like that kind of recognition for the work that they do. And I think that's something that's still growing. It is recognized, but it is still very much growing within Asia itself. And I think we can do more to recognize our community thought leaders and our community organizers. And then once those things are created, because these are people who step up and create platforms and group chats and groups, for us to meet that's when the community networking and support piece comes in. So the participants of these groups, when I participate in US events, I feel like the community is because it's a more mature concept there. So people have a very shared culture of like, networking and building close connections and supporting each other because you are part of a community. And I think that's something that we learn in time to make a habit of in Asia. There are like very strong community groups that we have, JavaScript in Singapore and the PyCon community across the APAC region. But I think we can have more of that and have more participants that come in with the mindset of, when I join a community, I'm going to be, the bro for all my other community people, and have that kind of mindset to be able to support other developers. And I think once we have that kind of camaraderie in the community that is unsaid and almost like mandatory for everyone to have, that's when our community can also grow in time. And then lastly, it leads to the business investment piece I talked about earlier on. So that's related to the point above. So I think all in all, these are the different 7 factors that then lead to developer culture coming alive. So I know I spent a bit of time setting a lot of context, but it's really important because then now I'll go into how the Asia piece can pick up on some of these factors that we've learned from the US side. So first of all, I think there are 3 main points. Okay, the first point being that for an Asia DevRel culture to boom, we really need to champion a hybrid engineering market of both regional unicorns and multinational corporations. So this is a big statement. I think it's I should have put it into a less complex sentence. But the point behind it is that earlier we talked a lot about the industry opportunities, and you saw how DevRel in the US really grew out of companies, proper companies, being able to champion that culture and invest a little bit in it so that the community folks have that space and resources to function as a community. And so I think that we do need to embrace in the US market a hybrid of both our regional tech, like regionally founded, regionally headquartered and regional engineering teams based here locally, regionally, kind of unicorns and companies, and also, you know, bring in the new thought that comes from more mature markets, like when the US sets up company subsidiaries here in Asia and headquarter them in the region. We do have a large part of that as well, and I think we need a balance of both. I think sometimes in some communities, I do see that either we are very much pivoted to over pivoting on MNCs and the talent that they bring in, and we're like, or the speakers that they bring in, like, okay, you know, because we want to learn from them, of course, but we also do need to recognize that there are a lot of great talent here. We need to not just recognize, but also build them up. So we need to be able to identify like the Gojeks and the Grabs, and these are just big names, but there are so many other startups that are growing today with some of the best engineers around. Like I've seen so many when I went to not even Jakarta itself, but like Job Jakarta, when there are so many developers there and startups, and they are great as well, but we might not see them. And so we need to learn to recognize and also bring them on the same stage and tap on those communities of engineers as well. And that's and I think based on this hybrid, that's when we can have like a good, like critical mass of good developers and engineers that then we can use to even like to kind of kickstart our DevRel culture more. So so that's what I'm trying to say over here. So these are just some of the companies that I brought up, but of course there are many more to be mentioned here. And also we have our great, like we do have a lot of FAANG companies set up in Asia as well. And I think we can also look to them for new ideas and also bring them in the community. So I think net in Asia, it will have to be a hybrid of both. Okay, and so I'll move on next to like things about leadership. So I just talked about industry opportunities and technical skilling and technical capabilities that we bring in when we embrace those companies as a whole. But now I'll talk a little bit about the leadership component of it. And so in Asia, I think that for an Asia DevRel culture to boom, we need more regional technical and thought leadership that is shared by the diverse region. So what I mean by this is we need more leaders to, you know, you could be really skilled, but you might not be a leader in that sense, right? And so I think it's very important to build out a culture of sharing and speaking up in Asia. I know that that's a little bit, you know, sometimes counterintuitive to what we grew up with as Asians, and I don't think it's as vibrant here as it is over in the US. But I think that we can definitely afford to do more of that culture of sharing and speaking up, and also nurturing the next generation of speakers. So how do we let's say, even as a peer, just tap someone on the shoulder who you think is a really good engineer or a really good community leader, or could be a great community leader, and tap on them and say, like, why don't you go speak at this conference that's coming up? Why don't you go start a community? You know, things like this. And so like Global Diversity CFP is a great example of that, when we had, like, I think a day last year or earlier this year, where we actually encourage more people to submit CFPs. So we do need to build more speakers. I think more speakers and more thought leaders and more sharing within the Asia community for us to be able to build our DevRel culture, because we can't have a culture if none of it is visible. So I think that's really important. Secondly, it's also about encouraging and supporting regional devs when they do share. So that's why I put in like a comparison between Asia thought sharing platforms and US thought sharing platforms. So in Asia, we have like Tech in Asia, we have Medium, we have Twitter. How do we also look for these regional devs and also amplify and share and support? That culture is super huge in the US, and so on Twitter itself or dev.to, Medium, people connect and amplify and share like crazy. And I think sometimes it's just the nature of what it's like in the US, and also the nature of their culture. But I think we can definitely, so when they do that kind of sharing, that's when the networks get a bit closer, and that's how the community gets stronger. And then that also attracts more people to then join on top of that. So I think we should have a little bit more of that culture of supporting and building each other up within the region. Lastly, we will also have our own challenges of overcoming a multilingual and diverse region. So I've like pasted only two examples here of like regional, locally, like country-based sharing platforms like engineers.sg and also Kita in Japan. But you see, those are in English and Japanese very differently. And I think in Indonesia, they also have their own, which is in Bahasa, and Korea, I think it's mostly amongst different personal blogs. And so we also have to learn how we're going to overcome the kind of multilingual and diverse region that we have, so that we can share thoughts together as a region, because then we build on the strength that we have as a whole region rather than as local communities on our own, which will never be able to hit that kind of critical mass to be as large as, let's say, the US maturity of their DevRel market. Okay, and then last of all, we'll be down to community organizers and community networking and support of each other. And so I'll touch on this now. So the last point will be around how for an Asia DevRel culture to boom, we really need more regionally connected communities and culture. And this is a segue from my previous point where I touched a lot about the need for different countries to connect with each other and come together as a region. And trust me, it's not easy. Like, I've done this for DevRel Folks Asia and DevSpeak, and it's really tough. Even with DevRel Asia, I saw Asushi-san and his team really go through a lot of different challenges to bring together the different countries, but it is going to be really important. Let me elaborate a little bit. So when we build together as a region, that's when we have we build on the strength as a region, because then we can share different best practices that, let's say, a certain country is more well known for a certain area of tech, and that's when we can share it across the different countries. Whereas compared to the US, they are huge, but they are homogeneous culture, and so they will not have to overcome these different challenges. But I think that's when we can come together, and also, of course, I'm sure all of us here know that there is a lot of advantages that come together when great ideas that can come out of having a diverse crowd. The only challenge is for us to learn to connect with one another. And I'll share some two other successful examples, which are like JavaScript Conf Asia and like PyCon APAC. So JavaScript Conf Asia, of course, it's seeing many different local speakers from Thailand and Malaysia all come together into Singapore to have a conference on its own. And PyCon APAC, like, I know that the organizers themselves, even though they organize their own countries' PyCons, they actually do come together every now and then to kind of collaborate and share different ideas and then go back and plan their conferences as well. So these are great examples of how we can work together as a region. And I think that for the Asia side, this is how we are vastly different from the US, but it could also be an advantage for us once we learn how to work together. So I definitely champion more of such regional initiatives. Yes, and also side note, I know the PyCon APAC logo is actually for Philippines, but I know that they do come together for different PyCon organizers. Okay, and then I think all in all, that concludes my talk. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. So we got some questions. So first question is, so what framework do you use to identify talented developers and motivate them to become mentors? Oh, sorry, not this one. Oh,
I think that was for the previous.
Yeah, that's previous, sorry. So Asia?
Oh, I see. I see a question from Ollie.
Yeah, so Asia, yeah, that one. Asia is so diverse in many ways, but so also the languages. Many people are not comfortable doing talks in English, and also some people cannot watch talks in English. Any ideas how to approach this show?
Yeah, great question, and very real challenge. And yeah, okay, so I think that there are a lot of ways that we can go around it. Honestly, I feel like it could be very simple ways like closed captioning or live captioning for a lot of the talks that we have is going to be really important. When I was at Microsoft, we always champion like turning on Teams, and I know it's a growing technology and it's not super accurate yet, but having live translation together with live captioning is going to be, I think, a game changer for the Asia region. And I think implementing, the technology is one piece, but also having that kind of habits as users and organizers for us to implement these things is going to be really important. I also think that there are other ways that I think we can be empathetic to how other people might not understand just English alone. English is not the main language in Asia. And so like when I was in Japan, I was like struggling because I did not understand a lot of the talks. But having like a community person that reaches out to people who are could be virtual, could be in person, reaching out to people who might not understand the main language that's being presented and being like, how can I help you? What else do you not understand? Here are all the different resources. And so I think that will be the key kind of cultural way that we can really connect the region more closely together. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And another one. What are some learnings US can take from Asia the relationship community?
Oh, what they can take from us? Oh, so many things. Where do I start? Uh, I think this is just a difference of culture. I think what they can really learn from us is, that's what is funny, right? Because Asia is very diverse, and so is the US actually. So aside from language, they actually are very diverse in terms of like everyone came from different countries and settled down in the US. I think what they can learn from us is how to be more inclusive of different cultures. I think in Asia, we automatically have to be inclusive because we don't have a choice. And so when, like when I meet my friends from Indonesia, I'm like, of course, let's speak at a slower pace and let's have, let me learn more about your culture and how you would run an event versus how I would run an event before we come together and plan for an event. And I feel like sometimes in the US, that's not an understanding that's very prevalent. I think that, more of the one way of doing things for homogeneous culture is the way that's championed. And I think it's slowly changing in the US. I do see a lot of groups that come up and say like, let's, dedicated to minorities or underrepresented communities. And that's a huge concept in the US that's growing, not huge, but growing very rapidly in the US. So I think that's one way that they can learn from Asia as well. The other way that I think that they can learn from the Asia-Dev relationship, okay, no, it's okay. I think it's mostly that one. Yeah, just mostly that one.
Thank you. Maybe this campus might be one of the showcase that we can we can show to the US.
Yes, I think this was a huge effort. I'm just gonna do a quick thank you to DevRel Asia and organizers like yourself. I know that it was not easy communicating in different languages and across time zones with everyone. So yeah, this is a really great example. And I think no matter what the outcome is, I think it's also about supporting initiatives like this. Like the rest of Asia's developers and engineers do need to come together and support initiatives like this more, even though it's growing now, so that it can actually become bigger later on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a privilege to have you and to build this conference together. Yeah.
I see all these points. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.